And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and let's talk about some underrated effects that I think you should be playing in the Commander format. I have covered some of this before in the past, but there's a few more I want to tack on here, and I thought I would make a whole video talking about it. So what do I mean by effects? Well, I'll start out with fog effects, and I just made a video about this, so I won't belabor the point here. Effects that do this thing, right? Not necessarily specific cards. Of course, in all of these situations, we have a few different cards, or in some cases like a fog, we have a whole bunch that can do it. It's an effect that you can do in a Commander game that doesn't see as much play as I think it should. Again, if you haven't seen a fog before, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. Of course, there is, I don't know, probably at least 100 different versions of this in the Commander format, some better than others. I think it's entirely underrated. You'd be surprised how often that 1 mana can save your life in a Commander game. Again, I won't go into it too much because I already made a whole video about it. We have them in most colors, so try to fit some more in your deck. If you can find room, you would be surprised how useful they are. I have also talked about Stifle quite a bit on my channel, so again, I won't belabor the point. I have made some probably controversial videos, I would say, in the past, talking about how in a lot of situations, and in fact, I can think of a bunch of situations where a Stifle is going to save my life over, like, say, a Swords to Plowshares, right? Now, Swords to Plowshares is obviously a very usable card in a Commander game. Everyone's going to have a creature in play, but a lot of situations where just a straight up removal spell will not work, where a Stifle will. Two of the biggest ones I like to bring up are the Craterhoof Behemoth situation, where removal spell is not going to work there, right? You can kill their Craterhoof Behemoth, but the ability is already on the stack. They're already going to give their team +X and trample. So getting rid of their Craterhoof isn't going to really do anything there. An Aetherflux Reservoir would be another situation where destroying their Aetherflux Reservoir probably means they're going to be shooting you in the face for 50 damage, right? I mean, unless by some chance they played it before they had the requisite life to use it, but I don't think anyone usually does that. Not really a smart move. Stifle will save your life in both of those situations, right? A Stifle will make that Craterhoof Behemoth into just a 5/5 hasty creature because you're going to counter activated or triggered ability. So of course, you're going to counter the ETB on that creature. You can also save your life with the Aetherflux Reservoir situation because your opponent is going to shoot you in the face. And again, this is even better because you can wait until it's actually being used on you, right? If you have a Krosan Grip, let's say, that's something that actually will work on a Aetherflux Reservoir. Well, I mean, I can destroy the Aetherflux Reservoir, but what if they're going to use it on my other opponents? Then I don't want to destroy it. I want to leave it around, right? In the case of Stifle, you can actually just wait until it's pointed directly at you and then use the Stifle effect to counter that activated ability this time, and they still have to pay the 50 life, right? For those who aren't aware, the activation cost doesn't go away. They still are down 50 life and they get nothing for it. That's maybe the extra good part about this. You sort of flip the situation around on them. So if you're a person that doesn't like a Craterhoof Behemoth or an Aetherflux Reservoir, and I've lost lots of games to those cards, Stifle will help in both of those situations, but it will help in 1,000 other situations. You really do have to pay attention, I suppose, and it's one of those things where, yeah, a counterspell or removal spell, it's pretty obvious the situations you want to be using them in. A Stifle, you might not notice it nearly as much. Famously, it gets used in Legacy quite a bit for fetch lands, where it essentially becomes, land destruction. I don't know if you want to use it for that in a Commander game, but you certainly can if you want to. It can also be used in just a very small situation. I mean, I know Dockside Extortionist is banned in the format now, or at least for now it is, but it works against that too. Your opponent plays Dockside Extortionist, hey, just stifle out of ETB and they don't get anything. There are some really, really important explosive situations where, man, a Stifle can really save your life. Again, there are lots of different options, not just that. Mostly they are in blue and green. Bind, funny enough, is a card that I just put into my mono green Questing Beast deck. This is kind of the only mono green version. It only works on activated abilities. You get the cantrip though, you get a draw card as well. So I can't use it on the Craterhoof, but I can use it on the Aetherflux Reservoir, or I can use it on, even just my opponent's commander's activated ability, whatever that might be, right? There's a lot of commanders out there with powerful activated abilities. 2 mana, I get the card draw as well, so I'm not even down a card. And, a lot of times you can almost turn an effect like this into my opponent just skips their turn because they're planning on doing this big thing on their turn, and I just completely ruined their plans. I find it's also a little less obnoxious than just countering something or removing something too, so there is that as well. Give some of these effects a try in your commander decks. Let's talk about Eerie Interlude, or the effects like this. And these are effects that used to get played in the format quite a bit. I used to see Eerie Interlude a lot. Also used to see Ghostway a lot. Slightly worse version, only slightly, because of course Eerie Interlude allows you to exile any number of target creatures you control and then return them to the battlefield under your control to begin the next end step, whereas Ghostway, you don't get to pick. It just has to be all your creatures, but that's not really much of a downside, right? So both of them are essentially doing the same thing. They are blinking all your creatures, and these cards still do get played a lot in blinking decks, and that certainly is a great use for them. They have gone to the wayside very much so in the Commander format, obviously because there's just better ways to protect your team, right? 8 Teferi's Protection. For 3 mana, I could just phase everything out. Or Clever Concealment, or all the other effects that we have like that. And that is more where I think you should be using this. Yeah, obviously you can use it to blink your creatures. If you're using this to protect your team, any ETB creatures that you have, that's an added bonus, right? So I'm talking about these not as, hey, you should put this in your blinking deck. Of course, people are already doing that because it's a great way to blink your entire team and get a whole bunch of ETB triggers. But here I'm talking about you should be playing this outside of an ETB deck where you just want to protect your team. And I will give you a couple of reasons why this can be even better than a Clever Concealment or something like that. Now, first of all, phasing is kind of the best way to protect your team, obviously, because you can't touch it. Can't really touch it in exile either, right? If I use this to exile my whole team, Farewell's not going to hit them, nothing's going to hit them, right? There is no board wipe in the format that is going to touch your creatures, and then they come back on the end step. The fact that they come back on the end step is actually a good thing, and is why a card like Eerie Interlude can be better than one of those phasing out effects, or in fact, way better than one of those I give my team indestructible and hexproof until end of turn. But also, having your creatures come back on the end step is actually a good thing. There is a downside to phasing out all your creatures, and that is you don't have any blockers, right? If you got 3 opponents and this guy casts the board wipe and you phase out all your creatures, okay, now you have no creatures until your next turn. That's actually kind of a downside. Again, when phasing was first introduced into the game of Magic back in Mirage Block, it was kind of seen as a downside. Your creature phases out, which means you don't have access to it. Now, I will point out that, of course, everyone's getting their board wiped, so who's going to attack you with a creature? Well, anybody who has hasty creatures can attack you. Anybody who has cast their own protection spell can attack you, right? So if someone else casts a heroic intervention, their creatures stick around. Now they can just pummel you. You have no creatures in play. Also, a lot of decks really want their commander in play for a variety of reasons, right? Likely you've built your deck around your commander. So having your commander phased out for an entire turn cycle can be really bad for you because it shuts off your commander's effect. Your commander's not around, right? In most of those situations with the Clever Concealments and the Teferi's Protections and that, you don't actually need your commander to be phased out for an entire turn cycle. You only need it to be phased out for that one specific situation. The guy's casting a board wipe, right? So having your commander come back into play on the end step of that person's turn means now my commander is active for the next couple of turns rather than it's gone for an entire turn cycle, right? Typically, you don't need your commander phased out for that long, or any of your creatures phased out for that long. Eerie Interlude and effects like this will do essentially the exact same thing. They will protect your team against any kind of board wipe there is out there. Cyclonic Rift, protect against that too, right? They're in exile. That's even better because then, again, they come back on the end step and now you have those creatures. And as I just talked about in my board wipes video, because everyone has a lot of these protections, we want to be playing more one-sided board wipes. And this is a way, again, to protect my team and also keep my creatures around for everyone else's turn rather than having them phased out for everyone else's turn, which could be really problematic. So these effects, I think people should start looking at them again for just I protect my team, and getting extra ETBs, added bonus. All right, I'm going to end off with Pithing needle effects. This is definitely an effect that we do not see much in the Commander format, and I think it's very much underrated. I actually was playing a game against a patron. They had a pithing needle in their deck, and I was like, man, I haven't seen that card in a long time. Of course, it was a modern staple for a long time. When I played Modern, I'm not sure if it still is. If you haven't seen it before, because if you just play Commander, you probably haven't seen it before. 1 mana artifact, as it enters the battlefield, choose a card name. Activated abilities or sources with the chosen name can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. So just like a Stifle, the use for this card isn't like super apparent right out of the gate, but there is no chance you will ever play a Commander game where this isn't going to be handy. Of course it's going to be handy. If you just have your opponent's Commander, and again, they don't even have to cast it, it's in the command zone. You have anyone in your play group with a problematic commander that has an activated ability, you can just shut it off before they even get their commander out, right? I mean, yeah, they can destroy it, of course, but it's a hoop they have to jump through, right? And again, there are some really powerful commanders out there with some really powerful activated abilities that you can just shut them off for a while. With a card like this is as they enter the battlefield. That's the funny thing about this card is you say, I'm casting a Pithing Needle, and someone goes, okay, well, what are you picking? Oh, hold on. It hasn't resolved yet. We're waiting until it enters the battlefield before I choose the card name. So your opponents actually can't react to you choosing what card you're going to pick for this. So if your opponent has a Polluted Delta in play, I mean, I don't know if you would ever use it for this, but it is kind of a funny way to use it. If your opponent has a Polluted Delta in play, that is an activated ability. It's not a mana ability. I cast my Pithing Needle. They don't know what I'm going to pick. It comes into play and I just pick their Polluted Delta. No, they can't crack it to go get something. But there's a million other options. I don't think you'd ever use it for that because there's going to be so many options, again, just like with the Stifle, of great things you can be using this for. A Lightning Greaves. There you go. There is a card that I can name. And by the way, any of my opponents using that card, right? If I have a couple opponents with Lightning Greaves, now I can use my Pithing Needle, name Lightning Greaves, and they can't equip their Lightning Greaves. It just shuts off the equip. And of course, Lightning Greaves is really important in a lot of Commander decks. For me personally, I hate it. Whenever my opponents are playing Lightning Greaves, I always try to get it off the table immediately because I like to be able to target my opponent's creatures. That's a great thing to shut off with this. A Planeswalker, that's another great thing to shut off with this. Your opponent has a troublesome Planeswalker or even a Commander as a Planeswalker, 1 mana, and I just shut that thing off for a while. That seems pretty darn handy, right? There are other effects like this, of course. This one does not work on mana abilities, but it does, however, work on lands that don't have mana abilities. So if your opponent has a land that has some activated ability that isn't a mana ability, like a Ghost Quarter, for example, right? I don't know, maybe they have a Ghost Quarter and you don't want them to use it. You can name Ghost Quarter and they can still tap it for mana, but they can't destroy any lands with it. Scavenger Grounds, again, there's another situation where my opponent has a Scavenger Grounds in play and I want a Living Death, but I know they're going to respond with their Scavenger Grounds, so I just use the Pithing Needle. And yeah, they can respond to the Pithing Needle, but do they know I'm going to name Scavenger Grounds? Even if they did, I'm not wasting my Living Death. Now I force them to exile all graveyards, and I can use my Living Death later on when I refill my graveyard, right? There's so many scenarios like that where this can be great. Phyrexian Revoker, of course, is another version of this, slightly different. This one is a 2-mana artifact creature, Phyrexian Horror, 2/1. So this is a creature which can be better, can be worse. Again, if something is just an artifact, it's less likely your opponents can get it off the table. So in that way, Pithing Needle is kind of better. Phyrexian of Revoker is better because when it enters the battlefield, you choose a non-land card name. Activated abilities of sources with the chosen name can't be activated. So here you can't choose lands. Okay, that's where Pithing Needle has the advantage. However, this has the advantage where you can shut off mana abilities. So that means, again, there's no situation where a Phyrexian Revoker isn't going to be useful for you. In a Commander game, you hate that all your opponents play Sol Ring and you don't play it. You just slap this baby down and you choose Sol Ring. Sol Ring is not a land and it does work on mana abilities. So now none of your opponents can activate their Sol Rings, right? Easy peasy. Again, it works with 90% of the things that the Pithing Needle is also going to work with, but it also works with shutting off mana abilities on non-land sources. And again, there's going to be no game you ever play where this isn't going to be sitting in your hand and you look at the board and there's going to be like 5 or 6 different things that you can just go, hey, I could just shut off my opponent's, whatever the case may be, for a couple of turns until they get my Phyrexian Revoker off the table. I think that's a really handy effect to have in a Commander game, right? That's what I'm talking about here in this video. All of these effects I think are underrated in a Commander game. Fog effects, Stifle effects, Eerie interlude effects, and the pithing needle type of effects of shutting off activated abilities of certain things temporarily. I think they're all good. And again, I think they're all not super obnoxious. Like, your opponents might not love that you pithing needle one of their things, but it is just temporary. They can get it off the battlefield, right? I think it's not nearly as bad as removing it. And again, removal might be better in a lot of these situations. Like, why not destroy that thing instead? Well, a couple of reasons. Again, with the pithing needle situation, they don't know what you're going to name. So you might be able to shut it off before they can use it. Whereas with removal, they can probably respond to your removal by activating it. Also, we're in certain colors here in the Commander format, and certain colors aren't really good at certain things, right? Maybe you're in a mono red deck and your opponent has an enchantment with an activated ability. Good luck getting their enchantment off the battlefield, right? You might want to use a pithing needle to shut that thing down. These are just options for you. I think they deserve a little more attention in the Commander format. You guys let me know in the comments below if you are using any of these effects already, or if you plan to. That is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.